Welcome, everybody, to the next episode of the Business Performance Podcast. And today it's my pleasure to talk to Dan Stoller, who I've known for many, many years. He's a strong quality professional that has been focusing on process improvement with different standards from the CMM to ISO for the last 25 years across oil and gas, electronics, and medical devices. So please welcome Dan to the podcast.
Happy to be here.
So Dan, to begin with, would you please briefly describe what you've done most recently and the types of customers you've served and the services that you provided?
Well, what I do is quality management consulting. My specialty is taking and building quality systems from the ground up, where companies have had basic procedures, not much documentation, and then helping them develop that documentation, put together their management system, go back and audit that management system to make sure that they're ready to go ahead and go with certification.
Okay. So what is the importance for for the certifications and all this stuff to the companies? Why do they even care about it?
Well, for many of them, they're trying to do business in an area like Europe or China where they do require you to have some form of certification, and that's usually ISO. So if in order for them to do that, they have to be able to prove to these registered bodies that, yes, they have a capable quality system, and the easiest way to do it is to achieve an ISO registration.
Okay. So what are one or two of the biggest myths or misconceptions out there when it comes to trying to put a quality system in place?
One of the biggest myths is that you can just get something off the shelf, put in your company name, put in your pieces, and then say, boom, it's ours. In the times that I've seen people try to do that, it doesn't work because it really doesn't reflect how you do things. You're taking your processes and you're trying to shoehorn them into something that you've got off the shelf, as opposed to taking how you do stuff, document that, and then fine tune it to the pieces that meet the requirements.
Okay. So with your experience, what was the biggest challenge that you ever faced when it came to doing that?
The biggest challenge, and it's been at pretty much every place where I've done this type of work, is getting upper management to understand the value of it. For example, when I was working with OmniFlow Computers, this was a company that had been around for over 25 years. They thought they knew what they were doing. They had a feeling that they were putting out a good product. So what we did is we implemented a final inspection procedure. What were the top 20 items that a flow computer had to do right out of the box? So we would test that before it would leave. And what we found is, in doing that, 42% of all devices were fine. They passed they passed that inspection process, but it's the remainder of those that weren't, and that was a problem. So in order to prove to management, we started doing this and we started collecting data, and we were showing them what was going wrong. What were the things that need to be done and that the product had to do when it got out of the box that it wasn't doing. So once we started doing that and started implementing improvements, they started to see the improvement over time, and then they bought into it. Especially with a company like that, that's a mom and pop. You have and engineers too. In dealing with engineers, those are the type of people that really have to kind of touchy-feely. They have to have their hands on something. They have to have data to know what's going on in order to make those decisions. And if they don't have it, they just go on what their gut instinct is.
Okay. So when you brought me in to help out with engineering services, what was your motivation at that point?
The motivation was that we were trying to make it a product as opposed to just being, call in and we'll help you. We wanted to be able to set up levels of service programs. So in order to do that, you have to be able to understand what your product is, what you're offering to people. And ISO 9001 now is actually treating service as a product just as you would build something. So how do you make sure you have the right requirements, and how are you making sure that you're adding value to your customer experience? And that's why I needed you to come in, because you've had that experience through the years. And also it was something that needed dedicated resources and time to be able to build that up.
Yeah. So what was the outcome from that? After I, what was the end result?
The end result is that we were able to uh, create at least two levels of service, one base level that comes with the product, and then another one for customers that would pay for service contracts. So as part of that service contract, you got additional attention, you got additional upgrades and things like that as soon as they came out, as opposed to things were available on the website and you were able to check them over time. So it was creating that extra value for the customer, and we were able to do that with those service contracts.
Okay. All right. So after OmniFlow, then you went off to MagTech and Emerson.
Yes, actually, in between, I was doing work at a company called ClearCorrect. If you've ever heard of Invisalign, and this is one of their large competitors, this is uh, basically a form of plastic, not really plastic braces, but what they do is they have these algorithms that take pictures of molds of your teeth and then show how the progression should go to straighten them out, eliminate gaps, etc. So in that instance, I was setting up a quality management system for them that was making ISO 13485. And then after that, moved on to part of Emerson called MagTech, and they do level measurement systems. And so the challenge there was we had issues when products would get to customers. Uh, we measured those in terms of parts per million. So when you're talking about 24,000 parts per million, it sounds really, really bad.
Mhm.
But there were issues and they had to be addressed. The problem is in measuring something that's in parts per million, you really need to do that when you're doing a product that you're producing thousands and thousands of on a weekly, monthly basis, whereas this particular company was producing 100 units in a month. And so all it takes is one thing to go wrong for those numbers to skyrocket through the roof. But there were issues. And what we did is, again, implemented a form of checklist to make sure that all these things were in the boxes, that things were secured, that they were properly handled, that things were tested before they left, to make sure that when they got to the customer, they were ready to just be installed and running. And over time, we were basically able to cut that parts per million number in half. We were never going to fully get rid of all issues because, again, the volume just wasn't there to do it.
Okay. All right. So one of the constant themes that you've seen is upper management having to be convinced. So since you're dealing with that, how were you able to get into the company first without that support?
First, in many cases, it was that they saw the need, that they had a requirement to meet, something of that nature. With Emerson, each group has to have a quality manager or someone that's in charge of quality. That's their policy. That's the way that they're structured. For other places, like an Omni, like a mom and pop shop, it's because they're trying to sell in another market and they know that they need to have that system. So they need to bring in somebody to do that.
Okay. So could you share a specific story where you actually help people, overcome these obstacles and succeed? I mean, you talked about reducing parts per million, but anything specifically?
Um, Really going back to the OmniFlow experience, where they knew they had to have a documented quality system. They knew they had to have ISO 9001 registration because they wanted to be able to sell product in Europe, and they also wanted to be able to sell product in Brazil. Now in Brazil, there's a registration body called Inmetro, and they require all providers down there to be ISO 9001 certified. So what we did is I went to them, well, they came to me, brought me on, and I said, okay, this is what you need. Now let's go through the scope and let's do this one piece at a time. And we set out a plan and we worked towards that plan. Uh, Normally, in order to do ISO 9001 from the ground up when you don't have any documented procedures, my experience has been that it takes somewhere around 18 months to 2 years. We were actually able to do it in 18 months.
Mm-hmm. So so what kind of challenges you had? I mean, there was a lot of personalities there that I remember that you had to overcome.
Yeah, it's just working with them, understanding, what their hot buttons are, what what turns them on as far as what they're interested in, what they really want to pay attention to, and then showing them value as to why we need to do these things and how it pays off for them. Once you can do that, then you get the buy-in, and then they start working with you. You just can't come in and dictate things. You have to get to know the people, know how they do things, and then take that, adapt it, and start to show them through measurements or just by working with them and talking to them how it's going to benefit them over time.
Yeah. So Omni was a fairly small organization. So, but typically, you know, when you look at the populations of the people or the characteristics, you have the innovators, the early adopters, the early majority, late majority, and the laggards. So did you have people in each of those categories?
I had more towards the back end of that spectrum, just because a lot of people that were there for a long time. They were very comfortable in what they were doing, and without any data to show, they felt deep down that they were doing well. It's only when you start to gather data, get information from customers, start listening to the voice of the actual end users, and you start to find out maybe things aren't what they really should be.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, so how how have you been able to leverage that with your follow-on engagements?
Really, it's just taking a similar approach, talking to people, understanding how they're doing things, what turns their buttons, what pushes their buttons, what they need to know to do things, and then just kind of guide them along. You don't want to be the fist coming down on people. You want to be that conscience. You want to be sitting out there kind of on their shoulder saying, we should really try to steer towards this, and here's why. Making these process changes, understanding that we want to try and save money. We don't want to do things twice when we only need to do them once. So what do we need to do to save us some money, get things out faster, and improve our reputation?
Okay, so how about, can you share or spend a few moments about telling our listeners a little bit about your backstory and what defining moment or epiphany that you had that inspired you to become a quality professional?
Really, growing up, I had a variety of interests, mostly in sports. Originally started going to college and wanted to be in sports medicine, but started working at the local campus radio station, started leveraging my knowledge of sports to start doing broadcasting of college football, baseball games, and then started working more in the communications field. Was actually more comfortable sort of being behind the camera at the control panels than being in front of it. So that's where I started developing this wanting to be a systems guy, wanting to work kind of behind the scenes, not necessarily being the face, but helping people succeed. And from that, being able to take communication skills and then learning quality fundamentals. Actually, one of my first jobs out of college was a small place called CompuServe. I don't know if people still know what that was back in the day, but one of the first online services and dealing with internet. So I just got my hands more and more into technology, dealing with software development, and then I'm moving on into the electronic side. So always trying to have my hands into different types of technology and learning new things. That's one of the things I'm always very ardent about, is that you have to learn something new each day. And if you're not learning, I kind of feel like you're not living.
Yeah. Okay. And kind of follow on to that, would you please share an experience you had early on in your life that still influences how you approach business today?
Really, it was in working at CompuServe, where you never really before had a chance to work in a team environment. And so this was the first time that I actually had to work in a team environment where we were all trying to achieve the same goal. We were trying to get our products released. So that's something that really taught me about how to work in teams, how to work with people, to be able to achieve a common goal. And that's something that's stuck with me ever since.
Okay. So yeah, now that kind of reminds me, I know that you've been involved with hockey for many years. So how has being on a hockey team influenced how you approach business?
It told me I needed better knees, but but really, again, it's being together as a team and everybody being focused on what the end goal is and what everybody's part is and being able to achieve that.
Mm.
You don't want your defenseman always rushing up trying to score, because all of a sudden you're leaving your goaltender hanging out to dry. So, when are the times where you can rush ahead, and where are the times that you need to sit back? And so everybody understanding what their role is, what they're trying to do in order to achieve the end result.
Okay. Yeah, and then the other thing I know about you, you're an ardent beer brewer. So
Yes.
how does that relate to quality?
Um, Brewing your own beer, you have to understand your processes. And you also have to understand what could go wrong as part of your processes, because you're putting all this time and effort into it. And at the end, you may not have a good product. You may have developed some off flavors, off aromas. Something may just not be right with it. So at that point, you have to do a post-mortem, understand what went wrong, and then fix it so you don't do it again. Uh, I've had to throw out a couple of batches of beer because of that, but at least you understand what went wrong, you go back, you fix your process, and then you go ahead and make it better than it was before. I've kind of gone through that recently because I've changed equipment, so I can up the size of batches that I can do. So it takes me a while to understand, okay, how does this equipment work? Where I did things another way, now I have to do it a new way, and how do I understand how that works?
Okay, and that brings up a nice topic about lessons learned. So what advice do you have for people when they collect lessons learned, and what to do with that information so you can not repeat your same mistakes?
Really just in certain instances, I've been in different companies with different people doing lessons learned exercises. And the one thing I will say is, please take it seriously and go in depth about it. Because sometimes people will say, well, it was this, and as long as we don't do the X, everything will be fine. Well, X may not be the true root cause. Really go through the step to find out what the true root cause was, so that when you eliminate that, you don't have to worry about any other issues up the road. You may find multiple root causes. And again, look at those and what your mitigation strategies are to keep those things from happening. That's really where you get the true benefit out of those lessons learned. Is don't just do the report and leave it sitting on a shelf. Go back, take a look at it, take action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that all feeds now into my next, the main purpose of the podcast is business performance, because there's lots of different capabilities out there, from like planning and estimating and managing and requirements and all. How does all that all connect from a quality perspective for the performance of the organization?
Well, it all comes together, and usually if you're doing a quality management system along the lines of like ISO 9001 or ISO 13485, there are elements in those standards that help guide you, because you have to have those things. It's required. So you have to have a business planning process. You have to have a quality management planning process. So you have to have those things, and you have to use them in order to not only get benefit out of it, but to meet the requirements of the standard. So those things really drive the integration of the processes. And that's why these standards evolve over time, is that based on what's happening in industry and management systems, you have to be able to put things together so that they are truly integrated.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have that, then you've got a quality management system, you've got an environmental management system, you've got your IT management system. How do you put those things all together so you have one true business management system that you use across your company?
So what does success look like for you then, as far as trying to integrate all this stuff? How do you know that you've achieved success?
Um, when you have an operation that you have measurements, you are working towards those measurements. Well, actually, you're using those measurements as data. You have goals, you have a plan established, and then you have measurements established to actually show what your progress is against those things. And then if you're not making the progress that you want, that you're making the changes, and that you show that you're making the changes. And then again, you have the data over time to show you that you are meeting those goals. And then you go and set new goals. So you have that cycle. And organizations that are successful at it, you see that cycle in progress constantly, and you don't see them just sitting pat. You see that even in certain instances, especially like medical devices, ISO 13485, it's 9001, but there's additional requirements with regards to complaint reporting and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also one key omission, in 13485 is that there's no continuous improvement requirements. That's in 9001. Because in order to meet the needs of your customers and regulatory bodies, you really have to have your system down and right from the get-go. But those companies even have improvement pieces into, how do they make their products better? How do they utilize new technologies to be able to make their devices smaller, more efficient, longer lasting? So even though it's not required for them, they do have that piece and they are using it.
Okay. All right. So what's the most important question that companies should be asking when they consider having you come in and do their quality management system?
Well, it's a couple of questions, and that's, where do we want to go, and how do we want to get there? How can you help us get there? First, I need to know where they are and what they want to actually achieve in order to know what I need to do to tailor a program to what their needs are. If they just want to say, I want to be ISO 9001 compliant, I would tell them that's nice, but you need to tell me why you want to do it and what things are important to you as a business so that we can tailor it to make sure that it works for you. Mm-hmm. Again, going back to the off-the-shelf analogy, you just don't want to be able to pull something off the shelf, change a couple of words, and hope that it works for you. You want to leverage what you already have and then make it work for you.
Okay. And then kind of following on to that, what's the most important thing companies should be considering when evaluating if you are the right person for this position?
Really, who has experience building things from the ground up or refining it depends upon what stage their quality management system is in. In most cases, they're trying to meet a requirement. They don't have things documented in place, and that's why they're coming to talk to someone like me. In that case, I would say, I've done this at multiple companies. I've done this for over 25 years. I can guide you through it, but we're going to do this as a team.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now reflecting back over your career, if you had to start things all over again from scratch and go down to still be a quality professional, what have you personally learned that you would do differently today than where you came from?
I would have definitely taken a couple more engineering courses because it allows me to understand a lot of my engineering knowledge I've acquired through the years by working with actual engineers, understanding products and being able to explain things. I think I would have been able to do it a little bit faster if I had more of an engineering background. But I've been a fairly quick learner on things. I've been able to understand technologies and be able to, explain them because that helps me drive what processes are. For a recent place I worked, this was a rather old technology. It's Fischer-Tropsch technology. It was originally developed after World War I by the Germans because due to reparations, they were denied certain technologies, and one of those was the ability to build refineries that could actually develop crude oil into gasoline. Well, they actually discovered a process over time where they could take coal and a catalyst, in this case iron, and through a series of applying heat and pressure, they would make those carbon chains longer and longer, and they developed diesel fuel. But with hydrocarbons, again, and with more pressure and more heat, those chains become longer and longer, and it goes from a liquid to more of a solid, so you can develop waxes. In addition to, you can actually nowadays do diesel that's zero emission, but the cost point for it is significantly higher than just standard diesel. But this is what this particular company wanted to do, was take natural gas and using cobalt as a catalyst, that, again, through that heat and pressuring process, you create wax.
Ah, cool. So I know this is always kind of like when the customer starts looking at it and say, we're unique. We are have a very unique set of technology, and like we're like electronics or medical devices or oil and gas. We want somebody that has experience in that area. So when they come to start talking about quality management, how are you able to convince them that these things are universal problems, not related specifically to a vertical?
I just go back to my experience saying I've worked in a variety of industries. I've done quality management systems that have had to integrate not just ISO requirements, but additional requirements, API, 20, CFR for Code of Federal Regulations, which is FDA stuff. So, while they have certain unique requirements, the problems that they face are the same problems that many other companies face on a daily basis. But how do we take those unique requirements and make them work for what they need to do?
Okay. All right. Well, so how can people get in touch with you to learn more, and if they want to, find out what they can do for a quality management system?
Well, the best way is probably to reach me via email right now, which is just dhstoller, STOLLER, at iCloud.com. Over time, intend to, work on things like a web page, some form of standard communication, just so that people can try and get the hold of me about these things. Right now, I'm just in the process of going through what I want to do with my career. Well, in the meantime, I'm open to people coming in and approaching me about any questions that they may have.
Okay. All right, Dan. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's fascinating. I've learned more about you today than learned over the years working with you. I found that you have great stories to tell. So thanks so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.